bipartisan manager's amendment. I want to note that when we vote on the judicial nominees, we will deviate slightly from the order listed on the agenda. We will vote on the 2 circuit nominees before turning to the district nominees. I'll begin by speaking briefly about the 2 circuit nominees. I'll then turn it over to the ranking member, Senator Grassley, for his remarks before the votes. As we have done in previous markups, I ask that members wait to comment on any particular nominee or bill until they're ready for consideration, and also that all members be mindful of the length of their remarks and out of respect for their colleagues. First, we'll be voting on Holly Thomas, who's been nominated for the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, a very qualified person. Since 2018, served on the Los Angeles County Superior Court. In the time that she was on the court, Judge Thomas has handled hundreds of cases that have gone to verdict or judgment, presided over thousands of hearings. As Judge Pro Tem on the California Court of Appeal, she sat on numerous appellate court panels, authored 7 opinions, all of them unanimous. A native of San Diego, Judge Thomas has been fascinated by the law since her childhood. Her mother, a bookkeeper, used to take her to the San Diego courthouse to watch proceedings. I can't imagine taking my grandkids to the courthouse to watch the proceedings, but her mom did. She received her undergraduate degree from Stanford, her law degree from Yale, clerked on the 9th Circuit. Prior to assuming the bench, Judge Thomas dedicated her legal career to fighting for those too often without power or privilege. Began her career at the NAACP Legal Defense and Education Fund before joining the appellate section of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. During her time with the Justice Department, Thomas argued cases before the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 9th Circuit. Went on to serve in the New York Solicitor General's office and later the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing. She has demonstrated that she understands the difference between advocacy and being a judge, having presided in a fair and even-handed manner over a wide range of issues. The American Bar Association unanimously recognized Judge Thomas as qualified to sit on the 9th Circuit. She has the strong support of her home state senators, Senators Feinstein and Padilla, and if confirmed, Judge Thomas would be the first black woman to serve on the 9th Circuit from California, and only the 2nd black woman to ever serve in that circuit. Judge Thomas's varied professional background, her extensive appellate experience, and her tenure as judge, including service as pro tem appellate court judge, will serve her well. We'll also be voting on Judge Gabriel Sanchez's nomination to the 9th Circuit. Judge Sanchez has extensive litigation experience and has experience as well as an appellate jurist. Receiving degrees from Yale, Cambridge, and Yale Law School, Judge Sanchez clerked for Judge Richard Paez on the 9th Circuit, then spent 9 years as a civil litigator in private practice. Judge Sanchez worked in state government in California, advising the governor and state attorney general on criminal justice issues, which gave him an insight into the impact of judicial decision-making. Judge Sanchez oversaw long-standing federal class action litigation involving the California prison system and was instrumental in advancing criminal justice reform measures that prioritize public safety. Unfortunately, during his hearing before this committee, a few colleagues falsely accused Judge Sanchez of supporting the release of violent criminals back on the streets due to his work on California's Proposition 57. Let me give the background of what happened. In 2011, the U.S. Supreme Court issued an order requiring California to reduce its prison population, an order by the Supreme Court. In response, Judge Sanchez developed Proposition 57 with 3 major provisions. They were allowing judges to decide if a juvenile defendant should be tried as an adult, allowing corrections professionals to award good behavior credits to inmates, and allowing certain inmates to be eligible for early parole consideration. At no point did Judge Sanchez advocate putting violent offenders back on the streets. Only non-violent offenders were eligible for either parole under Proposition 57, a measure which was ultimately adopted by the voters of that state of California. In addition, since his appointment to the California Court of Appeal, Judge Sanchez has demonstrated a commitment to judicial independence, even-handed decision-making, most certainly on issues involving criminal justice. He is independent-minded, highly qualified, has the support of both of his senators, Feinstein and Padilla, and the ABA has rated him unanimously well qualified. I look forward to supporting his nomination, and now I recognize the ranking member, Senator Grassley.
I'll use my time not to talk about the nominees, but one item that's not on the agenda and then the bill that's on the agenda. The one item that's not on the agenda that I want to bring up is some discussions that's going on outside the Supreme Court about the case yesterday, Dobbs case that the court heard yesterday, as you all know. A number of Democrats and activists on the left have been attacking the court. It is worrying to see senators say something like this, quote, "If you want to see a revolution, go ahead, outlaw Roe v. Wade and see what the response is." Or a member of Congress claiming that, quote, 2 of the 6 far-right justices preparing to overturn Roe v. Wade are sitting in stolen seats. That same member, I didn't say that, quote unquote, 2 of the 6 far-right justices preparing to overturn Roe v. Wade are sitting in stolen seats, end of quote. That same member called to, quote unquote, expand the court. This tone and rhetoric is not very helpful. These statements undermine faith in our judiciary. It is irresponsible to undermine the public's faith in our institutions this way, especially from members of Congress, where our own approval rating is probably way below that of the Supreme Court. So, referring to stolen seats and illegitimate decisions does not help our country. We should be supporting the independence of our judiciary, not undermining it with partisan attacks. Now to the one bill before us, and just a short statement on that, and I probably won't say anything else. We also have one bill up for consideration today that also involves the judiciary, S-2340, the Daniel Andrew Judicial Security and Privacy Act of 2021. Its goal is to improve judicial security and privacy. We surely have seen a troubling number of threats and incidents of violence involving the judiciary in the last few years. Judges and their family members have been hurt and killed. We've also seen courthouses under siege by left-wing groups in places like Portland, Oregon. It's important that we have the tools necessary to protect judges and their families. I think this bill makes improvements by increasing judicial privacy protections. I also think several amendments may be considered, some that would provide greater security. So I look forward to the debate on that bill.
Thank you, Senator Grassley. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Holly Thomas, nominated to the Ninth Circuit? Unfavorably reporting.
Can't vote yet. We don't have a board members here.
I'll recognize Senator Padilla. We're waiting for a couple of members to show up. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just before we start taking action on the nominees before us, appreciate the opportunity to speak on behalf of the 7 outstanding California nominees on our markup agenda today. Along with Senator Feinstein, I'm proud to have recommended them to the President for his consideration and for nomination, and I'm certainly proud to support them today. I'll have more to say about the individual nominees as we vote on them, but I did want to take a moment to share the following about them as a group. Each of the 7 nominees before us, colleagues, is a sitting judge on either California state courts or in the federal courts as magistrates. There's nothing in their judicial records to suggest they will not each make excellent Article III federal judges. These nominees are each intelligent, thoughtful, empathetic, and balanced. And I certainly hope that my colleagues will join me in supporting their nominations today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Feinstein.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm very pleased to speak in support of Judge Holly Thomas, who's been nominated to serve on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 9th. Judge Thomas is an experienced appellate litigator and judge. She has impeccable credentials, and I think she'd make an outstanding addition to the Ninth Circuit. She's a graduate of my alma mater, Stanford, and Yale Law School. She served as a public interest lawyer in the federal government, as an appellate attorney with the Civil Rights Commission of the Justice Department, and also with state government in both California and New York. Since 2018, Judge Thomas has served as a judge on the California Superior Court for Los Angeles County. She works in the Family Law Division, which is, as everybody here knows, a busy court where she hears between 10 and 30 matters on average each day, including a mix of hearings and trials. She's also served on a temporary basis as a state appellate judge on the California Court of Appeals for the Second Appellate District. Judge Thomas has a breadth of experience and knowledge and would be a great asset to the federal bench. I urge members of this committee to support her nomination. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. On favorably reporting the nomination of Holly Thomas to be U.S. Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy. Aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons. Aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Ms. Hirono. Aye. Mr. Booker. Aye. Mr. Padilla. Aye. Mr. Ossoff. Aye. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Graham.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
Oh, I guess I don't have any signal. Is Lee's staff here? We don't have any signal.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley? No. Mr. Cotton? No. Mr. Kennedy? No. Mr. Tillis? No. Mrs. Blackburn? No. Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 11 yeas, 10 nays, and 1 no vote.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Gabriel Sanchez nominated to the Ninth Circuit? On favorably reporting the nomination of Gabriel Sanchez to be U.S. Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy? Mrs. Feinstein? Mr. Whitehouse? Ms. Klobuchar?
Senator,
Mr. Coons? Mr. Blumenthal? Ms. Hirono? Mr. Booker? Mr. Padilla? Mr. Ossoff? Mr. Grassley?
No.
Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn? No. Mr. Lee? No. Mr. Cruz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
The accent was bad enough.
Mr. Cotton?
Our guys couldn't even get around.
Mr. Kennedy? Mr. Tillis? Mrs. Blackburn? Chair Durbin?
aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 12 yeas, 10 nays.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next
Mr.
is
Chairman,
Senator Lee.
I'd like to be recorded as a no on Holly Thomas for the Ninth Circuit.
So, of course, Senator Lee has that right. Would the clerk report what the ultimate roll call would be on Holly Thomas if that change is made, when that change is made?
It would be a tie vote, 11 yeas and 11 nays.
Thank you. The committee has recorded a tie vote on Judge Thomas's nomination to be U.S. Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit pursuant to Section 3, subsection 1A of Senate Resolution 27 of the 117th Congress. I will transmit to the Secretary of Senate a notice of the tie vote under Section 3, subsection 1B of that resolution. Either the majority or minority leader may then make a motion to discharge the nomination. Next is Mary Catherine Kit Demke, who's been nominated for the Eastern District of Washington. For 6 years, she served as U.S. Magistrate Judge in the Eastern District. Judge has presided over hundreds of matters, including 400 civil cases that have gone to verdict or judgment. ABA unanimously rated her well qualified. Prior to assuming the bench, spent her entire legal career as a federal prosecutor, prosecuting a wide range of crimes. A first-generation in her family college graduate, Judge Demke's father was a cattle rancher. Her mother managed a lumber company. In her youth, she enjoyed showing cattle, pigs, and sheep for the 4-H and Future Farmers of America. Described it as working hard was just a way of life in her family. She has a strong support of her home state senators, Murray and Cantwell. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on her behalf or otherwise? If not, on favorably reporting the nomination of Mary Catherine Demke to be the U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of Washington, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy?
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein? Mr. Whitehouse? Ms. Klobuchar? Mr. Coons? Mr. Blumenthal? Ms. Hirono? Mr. Booker? Mr. Padilla? Mr. Ossoff? Mr. Grassley?
Aye.
Mr. Graham?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn? Mr. Lee? No. Mr. Cruz?
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass?
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley? Mr. Cotton? Mr. Kennedy? Mr. Tillis? Mrs. Blackburn? Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 16 yeas, 6 nays.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Judge Mame Frimpong, nominated to the Central District of California, currently serving as a Supreme Court judge in Los Angeles. She has already shown she has temperament we expect of judges, and her tenure on the Superior Court has won wide acclaim. For instance, the committee received a letter from retired Judge James Brandlin, who spent over 40 years in various roles in the California justice system, deputy sheriff, deputy district attorney, state court judge, wrote that Judge Frimpong is, quote, renowned for being neutral, impartial, nonpartisan, and non-ideological. The ABA has unanimously rated Judge Frimpong well qualified to serve as district court judge. She has the strong backing of her 2 state senators. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on her behalf or otherwise?
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Feinstein.
Thank you. I'd like to just say a few words in support of Mamie Frimpong to serve on the Central District in California. She is an impressive nominee. She has the skills and experience to serve the Central District well. She's the daughter of immigrants from Ghana, a graduate of Harvard College and Yale Law School. For the last 5 years, Judge Frimpong has served with distinction as a judge on the California Superior Court for Los Angeles County. She's also shown a commitment to public service through her previous work at the Justice Department. Through her demonstrated experience as a state court judge and her answers to questions asked by members of this committee, Judge Frimpong has made clear that she understands the appropriate role of a judge to decide cases without bias and based on the facts of each case that comes before her. I believe she's well qualified for the federal bench and will make an excellent addition to the Central District. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. On favorably reporting the nomination of Mamie Frimpong to be U.S. District Judge for the Central District of California, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Whitehouse. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Rono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Graham.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 12 yeas, 10 nays.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Charlotte Sweeney, nominated to the District of Colorado for the past 26 years. She has been a litigator in that state's courts and has tried over 20 cases to verdict or judgment. Throughout her career, she's built a reputation for integrity and respect. 26 attorneys who regularly or on the other side of the table, working as opposing counsel, have written to the committee offering her strong support. In addition to her litigation experience, she brings demographic diversity to the bench. If confirmed, she'll be the first openly LGBTQ Article III judge in Colorado and the first openly LGBTQ woman to serve as federal district court judge west of Mississippi. She has strong support of her home state senators Bennett and Hickenlooper and received a well-qualified rating from the American Bar Association. Does anyone wish to speak in her behalf or otherwise? If not, on favorably reporting the nomination of Charlotte Sweeney to be U.S. District Judge for the District of Colorado, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Whitehouse. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Rono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Graham.
No by proxy.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 11 yeas, 11 nays. Tie vote.
The committee has recorded a tie vote on Ms. Sweeney's nomination to be U.S. District Judge for the District of Colorado. Pursuant to Section 3, subsection 1A of Senate Resolution 27 of the 117th Congress, I'll transmit the Secretary of Senate a notice of the tie vote. Under Section 3, Section 1B of that resolution, either the majority or minority leader may then make a motion to discharge the nomination. Next is Judge Jennifer Thurston, nominated to serve on the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of California. She has been a magistrate judge for the Eastern District since 2009 and chief magistrate since last year, presiding over 30 jury trials, 400 bench trials, strong support of her home state senators Feinstein and Padilla, rated unanimously well qualified by the American Bar Association. Does anyone wish to speak on Judge Thurston's nomination? If not, on favorably reporting the nomination of Jennifer Thurston to be U.S. District Judge for the Eastern District of California, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Whitehouse. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley.
No,
Mr. Graham.
I don't have a signal.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sass.
Oh, I'm sorry. No by proxy.
Which, several names have been called, Chuck. Will the clerk call the names where there was no response?
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sacks.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 13 yeas, 9 nays.
Nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Judge Hernan Vera, U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, B.A. from Stanford, J.D. from UCLA School of Law, clerked for Judge Consuelo Marshall, spent 12 years with Public Counsel, the nation's largest pro bono law firm, was appointed to the L.A. Superior Court in 2020. ABA has unanimously rated Judge Vera as well qualified. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Judge Vera's nomination? If not, on favorably reporting the nomination of Hernan Vera to be U.S. District Judge for the Central District of California, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Whitehouse. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 12 yeas, 10 nays.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Graham?
I meant to vote no, I'm sorry, I'm the wrong person. I'll have to change to no.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 11 yeas, 11 nays, tie vote.
The committee has recorded a tie vote on Judge Vera's nomination to be U.S. District Judge for the Central District of California pursuant to Section 3, subsection 1A of Senate Resolution 27 of the 117th Congress. I'll transmit to the Secretary of Senate a notice of this vote under Section 3, subsection 1B of that resolution. Either the majority or minority may then make a motion to discharge. Next, we have Samantha Elliott, nominated to the District of New Hampshire. Ms. Elliott spent her entire legal career in that state, and as we heard at their hearing, has strong support of her two senators, Shaheen and Hassan, received a unanimous rating of well qualified from the American Bar Association. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Judge Elliott's nomination? If not, on favorably reporting the nomination of Samantha Elliott to be U.S. District Judge for the District of New Hampshire, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Whitehouse. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley.
No, or yes, yes.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 15 yeas, 7 nays.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Linda Lopez, nominated to the Southern District of California, served as magistrate judge since 2018, presiding over 7 bench trials, spent 25 years as a criminal defense lawyer, 11 years as federal public defender, tried 11 cases to verdict or judgment. Highly qualified, the committee received a letter of support from 3 senior assistant U.S. attorneys in San Diego U.S. Attorney's Office. It's clear why the American Bar Association unanimously recognized her as well qualified. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Ms. Lopez nomination? If not, on favorably reporting the nomination of Linda Lopez to be U.S. District Judge for the Southern District, California, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Whitehouse. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 12 yeas, 10 nays.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Next is Judge Kate Menendez, pardon me, nominated to the District of Minnesota. She served as federal magistrate judge since 2016. She has, before taking the bench, spent nearly 2 decades as a federal public defender. She received a unanimous rating of well qualified. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Judge Menendez's nomination?
Yes, Mr. Chair,
Senator
briefly,
Klobuchar.
Judge Menendez, as you know, has served as a magistrate for 5 years. Her orders and decisions have been adopted by the judges of the Minnesota Federal District Court, which includes judges nominated by Ford, Reagan, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump approximately 97% of the time. She handled hundreds and hundreds of cases, appeared before the U.S. Supreme Court twice, winning over Justice Scalia, who wrote the 8-1 decision in favor of her client. She is widely respected by the Minnesota legal community and has earned support from judges on Minnesota District Court, as well as several on the 8th Circuit. And 20 former federal prosecutors sent a letter in support of her nomination in which they praised her command of the law and commitment to justice. She will be an excellent judge.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. If no one else seeks recognition on favorably reporting the nomination of Catherine Menendez to be U.S. District Judge for the District of Minnesota, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Whitehouse. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 15 yeas, 7 nays.
Clerk, the nomination will be reported favorably to the floor. Next is Judge Jinsuk Ota, nominated to the Southern District of California, currently sits on the San Diego Superior Court. Judge Ota's family came to the United States from South Korea when she was very young. She attended Yale and New York University, spent a decade with the Consumer Protection Section of the California Attorney General's Office. She did regular pro bono work helping foster families through the adoption process. She's been rated well qualified by the ABA, has the strong support of her state senators. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Judge Ota's nomination? If not, on favorably reporting the nomination of Jen Sakota to be U.S. District Judge for the Southern District of California, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy. Aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Aye. Mr. Whitehouse. Ms. Klobuchar. Aye. Mr. Coons. Aye. Mr. Blumenthal. Aye. Mr. Rono. Aye. Mr. Booker. Aye. Mr. Padilla. Aye. Mr. Ossoff. Aye. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee.
No.
Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn. Chair Durbin.
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 12 yeas, 10 nays.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Finally, we have David Urias, nominated to the District of New Mexico, a highly skilled litigator in criminal and civil practice. He's represented a broad range of clients, from the victims of the 9/11 terrorist attack to hedge fund managers to plaintiffs of limited financial means. Rated unanimously well qualified by the ABA with the strong support of Senators Heinrich and Lujan. Does anyone seek recognition to speak on Mr. Urias' nomination? If not, on favorably reporting the nomination of David Urias to be U.S. District Judge for the District of New Mexico, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Whitehouse. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons. Mr. Blumenthal. Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Ossoff. Mr. Grassley.
No.
Mr. Graham.
Aye.
Mr. Cornyn.
No.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz.
No by proxy.
Mr. Sass.
No by proxy.
Mr. Hawley. Mr. Cotton. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Tillis. Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn? Chair Durbin?
Aye.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 12 yeas, 10 nays.
The nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Today, we're also voting on 4 U.S. attorneys, each of whom hails from a state represented by committee members. Greg Harris for the Central District of Illinois, Philip Sellinger for the District of New Jersey, Brandon Brown for the Western District of Louisiana, and Ronald Gaty for the Middle District of Louisiana. I hope I pronounced Mr. Gaty's name correctly. I want to briefly comment on Greg Harris. He's an outstanding nominee to be the U.S. Attorney in my home district, the Central District of Illinois. I practice with Greg. He served for nearly 30 years as an assistant U.S. attorney with a variety of leadership positions in that office. As a federal prosecutor, he's tried more than 50 cases to verdict or judgment, specializing in fraud cases, bankruptcy, and human trafficking. He also has more than a decade of experience in private practice, and he also served 3 years in the Illinois Office of the State Appellate Defender. He's a pillar of our community in Springfield, leading many efforts on charitable endeavors. His nomination is historic. In Mr. Lincoln's hometown, he'll become the first black U.S. attorney in the history of the Central District. Greg Harris is highly recommended by a nonpartisan screening committee that Senator Duckworth and I created. We're pleased to see that he was nominated by President Biden. I'm proud to support him. I understand we can proceed with an en bloc voice vote on the 4 U.S. attorney nominees receiving a vote today. So on favorably reporting the nominations of Greg Harris, Philip Sellinger, Brandon Brown, and Ronald Gaty to be U.S. attorneys, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. The nominee,
We've got some members.
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, could I be recorded as a no on Harris and Sellinger?
Senator Hawley will be so recorded. Anyone else seeking recognition? Senator
I'd like to
Lee?
be recorded as a no on Harris.
Senator Lee, no on Harris. Senator Blackburn?
No on Harris and Sellinger.
Clerk will duly note that. Any others seeking recognition? If not, as I mentioned earlier, the nominations will be favorably reported to the floor with those additions to the roll call just suggested. Next, we considered S. 2340, Daniel Anderl Judicial Security and Privacy Act of 2021. This bill is sponsored by Senators Menendez and Booker of New Jersey, co-sponsored by Senators Graham, Kennedy, Feinstein, and myself. It is named after the son of a New Jersey District Court Judge, Esther Salas, who is here today with her husband, Mark. Judge Salas and her husband and their son Daniel were at their family home on July 19th, 2020, when they were targets of a horrific crime. A disgruntled former litigant found their home address, posed as a delivery man, and came to the door with a gun. When Daniel opened the door, the gunman fired. Daniel was hit. He died a hero, trying to shield his parents. Mark was shot as well, seriously wounded. This is an unspeakable tragedy for any family to endure, and it is not the first time a federal judge and her family has been the target of a violent attack. 16 years ago, on February 28, 2005, my friend, a woman that I was happy to support for nomination to the federal court, Judge Joan Lefkoe of Chicago, came home to find her husband, Michael, and her mother, Donna, murdered inside her home. They'd been shot to death by another litigant who had a vendetta against the judge because she had dismissed his case. The reality is that by doing their job of administering justice in cases and controversies, federal judges literally put their lives on the line. Their families also are at risk. Too often, these judges become targets of threatened violence. It's not limited to the judges themselves, as I've mentioned. The family members are also, unfortunately, at risk. After the Lefkoe murders, Congress came together to pass important legislation to increase judicial security, including providing resources for courthouse security improvement and home intrusion detection systems. But the threat against judges, these threats have evolved. Daniel Anderl's murder shows that there are still vulnerabilities that we need to address. Judge Salas has worked with her home state senators, Senators Booker and Menendez, to honor her son's legacy and to protect others in the future. The bill before us is narrow, focused legislation that deals with a specific security threat that Daniel's killer exploited: the availability of sensitive personal information about the judges on the internet. The bill would protect judges' sensitive personal information, such as their home address, from being sold by commercial data brokers online. It would limit the posting of judges' personal information on government websites. It would set up a process overseen by the Administrative Office of the Courts to enable judges to request that other websites remove sensitive personal information where there is no legitimate public interest to publish it. The bill has been carefully negotiated and refined since its initial introduction last year. Senator Booker has worked overtime on this because I know what it means to him personally, and I'm sure we'll hear that this morning. Senator Booker is going to offer a substitute amendment that further refines the bill based on bipartisan discussions within the committee. Let's be clear. There are many threats to the safety and security of American families that are worthy of our committee's attention. But today's bill is focused on a specific issue of judicial security. It represents a carefully crafted bipartisan compromise responsive to this urgent issue. I want to commend Judge Salas, who, as I mentioned, is here today, her husband Mark, Judge Lefkoe, and so many others who've worked hard on this legislation to spare other families the tragedy they suffered. I want to thank and commend Senator Booker, Menendez, Graham, and Kennedy for making this a bipartisan effort, and I was glad to join as co-sponsor. I now want to turn this over to Senator Booker for his remarks before we move to the substitute amendment.
Mr. Chairman, if I might just before, could I ask consent to be named as a co-sponsor?
Without objection. Senator Blumenthal will be added without objection. Senator Coons. Senator Booker is recognized.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. And I really want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. This has been a very meaningful bipartisan effort, and some of my friends were quick to step forward and add a lot of help. But I really want to first at the outset thank Judge Salas and her husband Mark for being here today. And I want to say Mark had a god-awful recovery from the gunshot wounds that tore apart his body, and it's just so good to see you here looking good as we begin the holidays. I'm in awe of both of your strength. I've listened to you speak in numerous occasions. You moved an entire auditorium of people to tears as you spoke about the tragedy, but you turned your tragedy and your pain into purpose, and that's been really incredible. And I know you've moved people on both sides of the aisle in this committee. Last July, both Judge Salas and Mark experienced the tragedy of which Senator Durbin spoke, and their son Daniel, in an unimaginable moment was senselessly taken from them. These tragic events that day arose from what is basic, a basic lack of security measures to protect federal judges and their families. And we have an opportunity today to begin to change that awful reality in our country that creates such vulnerability amongst our judges and their families. The perpetrator who wounded Mark and took Daniel's life was able to compile an entire dossier on Judge Salas, from the routes that she took to work, to her place of worship, to her home address. And from that information that was easy to find online, he crafted a plan to murder her. This security gap needs to be remedied. Members of the judiciary have made the honorable choice to serve their country in pursuit of justice. It's an unglamorous job. That pursuit is undermined dramatically if judges have to live in daily fear for their safety and the safety of their families and loved ones. Before the horror that befell Judge Salas and her family, this was not an unusual event, unfortunately, in our country. There's been tragic murders of other judges: Judge John Wood, Judge Richard Duranko, Judge Robert Vance, the husband and mother of Judge Joan Lefkow, and Judge John Roll. And the threats against members of judiciary are rising dramatically. We all know this. Between 2015 and 2019, it has increased not once, twice, not three times, not four times, but five-fold increase in the threats and other inappropriate communications against federal judges and judiciary personnel. And that's why we have to urgently pass this Judicial Security and Privacy Act. The legislation would take important steps in safeguarding the personally identifiable information of federal judges and their family members from individuals who wish to do them harm. Additionally, it would provide U.S. Marshal Service and administrative offices of the U.S. courts with additional tools to identify and combat these horrible threats. The bill is endorsed by an array of organizations we respect: the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, the Federal Judges Association, the Federal Magistrate Judges Association, the National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges, and the Federal Bar Association, among others. I'm really proud that Senator Menendez, who's not a part of this committee, but has been leading on this as well. But I have to say, I've had a lot of great experiences on the Judiciary Committee, and this has been one of them. And again, I want to thank, in particular, Senator Graham, who's been a great ally on just causes, and Senator Kennedy, my friend, for their incredible work in shaping this bill in a way that it could get bipartisan support and pass on to the floor of the Senate for a vote. They've made this bipartisan effort really something that is one of my prouder moments in the United States Senate. But I also want to recognize the other members of this committee, including a lot of my Republican colleagues. My office has been working with a number of folks who have been really productive in offering feedback and suggestions, many of whom, from my Republican colleagues, we've been able to incorporate into the manager's amendment of this bill that we'll vote on very soon. Keeping our federal judges safe is an urgent priority. It is one of the equal branches of our government, and we should stand by their important role and the urgency of their safety amidst rising threats. I want to thank both the ranking member, Chuck Grassley, who's been, again, a great friend to me in my short time in the Senate and worked across the aisle on a number of things, but this one has been extraordinarily helpful. Your staff has been great. And of course, I want to thank Senator Durbin, who is a friend and mentor to me here in the Senate. Before ending, I want to take note that this bill is named after your son. And I've been with you enough to get to know his spirit, and I am so sorry for his loss. But the members today thought fit on both sides of the aisle to honor him by naming this bill after him. It is important that we do that. Your advocacy and strength have been indispensable in getting this, and your calls to my office on numerous occasions have really helped to continue the momentum. I urge all of my colleagues to come together for this bipartisan effort. And I'm just grateful again for the work that we've done together to get this bill to this point, and I hope we can vote it out of committee today. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, could I be added as a co-sponsor?
Without objection.
Thank you, Senator Booker.
Senator Booker, I suggest we adopt the substitute amendment, then see if there's any further amendment or any members seeking recognition.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes. Senator Rono?
may I be added as a sponsor?
Yes, without objection. We will now call up the substitute amendment, SIL 21C97. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The majority of members present having voted in the affirmative, the ayes have it. The substitute amendment is adopted. Does any senator seek recognition to speak or offer an amendment? Senator Cotton.
Mr. Chairman, I will call up my amendment ALB 21I46.
Senator may proceed.
This amendment would expand the protections of this legislation, the purpose of which I strongly support. It would include all government officials, be they federal, state, local, or tribal. It would allow them to file a written request to have their home address and phone number taken down from any public-facing website. The simple truth is that prosecutors, law enforcement, and even local officials who don't deal with crime in any fashion, unfortunately, face threats from members of the public, and they shouldn't have to worry about someone showing up at their home and endangering their family. That's why this amendment and the bill on which it's based, the Public Servant Protection Act, has been endorsed by the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, the Major Cities Chiefs Association, and the National District Attorneys Association. It really doesn't matter whether it's a school board member, a member of Congress, a police officer, or a county clerk. Just in the past week, for instance, we have heard from a Democratic congresswoman who played for the press a voicemail death threat she recently received. She should have the right to have her home address taken offline if it's posted online. This amendment is also based on existing law in California that already provides these protections there to state and federal officials. We know this model works because it's already worked there, and in fact, my office, when I first started working on this bill last year, I was contacted by a former federal prosecutor in the Southern District of California who noted that California law protected his home address just as it protects state officials. So I would urge my colleagues to support this amendment, which would expand the protections of this bill from federal judges and law enforcement officers to all government officials, whether they are federal, state, local, or tribal.
Senator Booker.
Thank you. Goes without saying that Senator Cotton and I disagree on a lot of issues, but this is something he and I agree on. We are seeing rising threats against everyone from American law enforcement all the way to members of this body, and it's something that we should take seriously as a committee and should figure out ways to see if we can address it. The challenge is right now that according to the Brookings Institute, nearly 24 million people, a little over 15% of the workforce, are involved in the categories that the amendment would cover: public and national service, noble people who do local, state, and federal work to protect us. This amendment touches the equities of a wide array of stakeholders, many of whom haven't even reviewed the legislation or contributed to it on its merits. I would encourage my colleagues to not support this amendment, but to perhaps join with me in a commitment that will take up the protection of the categories that Senator Cotton is talking about, and see what we can do as a committee to offer further protection at a time of rising threats of violence.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Have senators seeking recognition. Klobuchar was the first I noted, then Senator Kennedy, and I believe Senator Feinstein. Senator Klobuchar.
Right. I pledged to also work with Senator Cotton on this. I'll join Senator Booker in his vote on this important bill, but I think we have rising threats against elected officials, including in this Congress, really on both sides of the aisle, that we're seeing. And I think we have to consider doing something about it because people shouldn't have them or their families at risk for serving.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Cotton, as usual, has a great idea, and I think we ought to pursue it, but I think we ought to pursue it to a separate bill. I really worry. I think this bill has a pretty good chance of passing the Senate floor, and if we add to it, I think it might kill it. I also worry about the cost. We need time to investigate the cost of adding in everybody else. So that's why I'm going to oppose the amendment. But I hope this is not the last we've heard of his good idea.
Senator Feinstein? No.
Mr. Chairman, I wanted to speak on the amendment. It's my understanding it would strike a finding related to statistics demonstrating the rise in threats against federal judges. It limits the definition of the original bill of personally identifiable information so that it only includes home address and home phone number and does not include other identifying information such as mobile phone numbers, personal email addresses, or license plate numbers. So it expands the range of covered officials to be so broad that it would no longer be practically enforceable by the government. So if that is correct, I will be a no vote on this amendment.
Anyone else seek recognition on the Cotton Amendment? Yes, Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the author of this bill. I think this is a good and positive bill, and it's a bill that should be enacted. And I want to express our condolences to Judge Salas. What happened to you and your family is horrific. It is unimaginable, and no one should face that, whether serving as a judge or in any other capacity. And so thank you for being here, and thank you for serving. I think it's important that we enhance the protections for those engaged in public service who do so at risk to their own lives and their own families. I do think Senator Cotton's amendment is a good and positive step forward. As we all know, there are many others engaged in public service who also have significant threats, particularly those involved in law enforcement, those who are prosecutors, police officers. I can't think of another time on this committee when Senator Cotton and I have together joined forces to urge this committee to adopt California law. I don't know that that will happen again, but if the people of California thought this was an appropriate way to protect officials in that state, I think that goes a long way to answering whether it's administrable. California is nothing if not large and populous, and if it can work there, I would suggest it can work most other places as well. So I would encourage support of Senator Cotton's amendment, but I would also encourage support of Senator Booker's bill, which I think is a good and important bill.
Senator Cotton.
Just to respond to Senator Feinstein's comments, this amendment does not strike any findings. I believe you're referring to another amendment. It does focus on home numbers and addresses, which are the core public safety concern, and that is consistent with the California law.
Senator, if no one else seeks recognition on the amendment, there's been a suggestion made that a separate bill move forward, and I would just say that we would certainly, this committee would give the highest priority to such an effort, but the decision is yours on this amendment.
Can we move forward with the vote?
Certainly.
I think I know what the outcome is going to be, but I'd like to see to whom we should be speaking.
Okay, unless someone seeks recognition, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the Cotton Amendment, ALB 21146. I believe that's what it is.
Mr. Leahy? No. Mrs. Feinstein? No. Mr. Whitehouse? No. Ms. Klobuchar? No. Mr. Coons? No. Mr. Blumenthal? No. Ms. Hirono? No. Mr. Booker?
No.
Mr. Padilla?
No.
Mr. Ossoff?
No.
Mr. Grassley?
Aye.
Mr. Graham?
No.
Mr. Cornyn?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Cruz? Aye. Mr. Sacks?
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley?
Aye.
Mr. Cotton?
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy?
No.
Mr. Tillis?
Aye.
Mrs. Blackburn?
Aye by proxy.
Chair Durbin?
No.
Chair Durbin, the votes are 9 yeas, 13 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. I'll renew the statement I made earlier. If Senator Cotton wants to pursue this on a bipartisan basis, I hope he'll join Senator Booker and others in that effort. Senator Padilla, do you seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, just like to share with Senator Cotton and Senator Booker, even though it was a no vote on the amendment just offered, the fact that it was based on existing law in California. I'm happy to engage in fleshing out either through separate legislation or separate amendment on a different measure how to bring forth the spirit of what's in place and has been demonstrated to work in California for consideration of this committee. And Mr. Chair, if I can also be added as a co-sponsor on the overall bill.
Without objection, you will be added. Are there any other amendments to come before the committee?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Mr. Chairman, I call up Amendment SIL 21D10. This is an amendment in a similar spirit to Senator Cotton's amendment, but it is a far narrower amendment. What this amendment does is it adds to the protections of this bill current and former members of Congress. Like federal judges, members of Congress more and more are subject to threats of violence. We have seen in this body, tragically, the horrific shooting of Gabby Giffords. We have seen in 2017 a deranged gunman who went to the congressional baseball practice, who opened fire, who wounded multiple members of Congress, who nearly killed Congressman Scalise. Two of our colleagues, Senator Flake and Senator Paul, were at that game, and it was only the providential fortuity that Representative Scalise's security detail was there that prevented that day from being a truly horrific slaughter, and the heroic men and women of law enforcement who engaged and stopped that gunman. We've also seen Senator Paul violently assaulted at his own home, hospitalized, require surgery, have ongoing health issues as a result of that violence. And all of us have seen, I'm confident every member of this committee has received multiple death threats. That is unfortunately a component of serving an elected office now. And there's a long tradition in this body of judges and members of Congress being treated with some modicum of parity. I support Senator Cotton's efforts to expand it more broadly to law enforcement, but I think in terms of a narrow and focused amendment where there are serious and ongoing threats, adding members of Congress would be an improvement.
I just want to say this is a glorious day that I agree with both Senator Cotton and Senator Cruz about the urgency for us to do more to protect people who choose to serve publicly. We have, Senator Cruz and I both have witnessed not only incidences of horror, but even incidences that are profoundly, I think, violations. As one of our colleagues had people enter a bathroom. This is more of an indication that we should be doing more to protect our members from the growing threats that we see within our community. And again, I pledge to you, I would very much like to work with you on a bill to do just that. I would say to summon the wisdom of Senator Kennedy, this is a bill that has been put together and worked on. It has the ability to get to the floor for a vote and get passed. I'm worried that if we add something like this on it, it's going to weaken our chances to actually get it done.
Anyone else seek recognition? Senator Kennedy.
Yes, as is often the case, I find myself in agreement with Senator Cruz, and I think he's got an excellent idea. But I want to go back to my original thought. I'm really worried if we expand the scope of this bill, it's going to kill it. And I can see somebody arguing, well, you know, Congress people, here we go again. You know, they're an insular bunch, they're elitists, they don't even want to be able to have the public contact them. I don't agree with that, but I would hope that we could incorporate that into Senator Cotton's separate bill. I'm going to repeat. I mean, maybe this is just a baby step, but it's still a step. And I think that there's a reasonably good chance we can pass this bill on the Senate floor, but I really worry if we start expanding it. And those are my thoughts for what they are worth.
If there's no one else seeking
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz, Coons, White House.
So I just wanted to comment. I understand the sentiments that Senator Booker is expressing and Senator Kennedy, and anytime you have a bill moving forward, the argument can always be, well, gosh, if we add something to this bill, it jeopardizes the chances of passage. And that's an argument all of us are familiar with and that we always face. And I understand the concern with Senator Cotton's amendment. I support it, but it is a significant broadening of the scope. What I would suggest in this instance is this is not a significant broadening of the scope. It is focusing on a narrow category where there are repeated, multiple significant threats that are ongoing and that are escalating. And, you know, tragically, I think it's only a matter of time before we see another act of violence in the same tradition that we have seen multiple times. Both Senator Booker and Senator Kennedy suggested it would jeopardize the bill. I would ask a question. Listen, it's not controversial, I think, that the members of this committee on both sides of the aisle are among the more contentious members of this body.
Hear, hear.
And among the more willing to disagree and disagree vigorously. And so I would just ask, is there anyone on this committee who would pull their support for this bill if members of Congress were included? And I would suggest if there isn't, if the men and women in this room on the Democratic and Republican side of the aisle can agree, the chances of it jeopardizing the bill ultimately are significantly imperiled. And I would further commit to Senator Booker, if this amendment is adopted and the bill passes, and in the journey to the floor there is objection that stops its passage, I would consent to removing the amendment from the bill if that's what it took to pass it. I'm skeptical that including members of Congress would genuinely jeopardize its passage. And I believe if this committee, both sides of the aisle, agreed on it, that it would be a very modest but important addition to the bill to protect the safety of our families and our homes.
I might just observe that Senator Cotton's approach to this is all-embracing, as Senator Booker noted. But for us to then follow up with an amendment saying, but of course we're going to protect ourselves, sends a message to the American public, which I don't think we want to send at this moment. I really believe this notion of taking a separate bill and expanding it to include the category of members of Congress and former members and other elected officials is the right approach and in the right spirit. This brings on an element of controversy which may bring down an absolutely essential bill that Senator Booker brings before us. And I hope that, as Senator Kennedy has noted and others, that we take it a step at a time. And the important step today is the passage of the bill as Senator Booker has proposed. We have two seeking recognition that I've seen, Coons, White House, Klobuchar.
I'll be brief. I think the chairman summarized the comments I was going to make as someone who's close to both former Congresswoman Giffords and Senator Flake and knows Congressman Scalise and is close to the U.S. Marshal from Delaware. I'm well aware that there's a broad range of threats, increasingly, to those of us who serve here, to law enforcement, to prosecutors, and I do think we need to take action. I think the balance that Senators Booker and Kennedy have spoken to about this bill makes me narrowly come down on the side of voting against this particular amendment, but I just wanted to publicly express my enthusiasm for working with both Senators Cruz and Cotton on helping craft that next bill and trying to make sure we can get a workable bill passed. Thank you.
I'll bet Senator
Whitehouse.
I just was going to answer Senator Cruz's question by saying I am one senator who'd be very skeptical of adding ourselves to this bill at this point. I think it's going to take a lot of consideration when we as members of Congress undertake measures that further separate us from our constituents. And while there may be a reasonable pathway, given the dangers that are, in fact, out there, count me skeptical.
Senator Klobuchar.
Well, count me not skeptical. I didn't even know about Senator Cruz's amendment, but some members, Senator Chairman, have security for obvious reasons if they're higher up in the Senate, and then others don't. And I think that there are some legitimate threats and things that have happened to people that people don't even know about that aren't public. So I am supporting this amendment. I would withdraw my support if, in fact, it would do anything to hurt the judicial part of this. But I think for us to pretend this isn't happening right now is a wrong path.
Anyone else seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Given the comments, it appears that the votes are not here to pass this amendment today. And so accordingly, I'll withdraw my request for a vote on it. But I look forward to following up with the multiple members on both sides of the aisle who have expressed a willingness to work on this issue, because I think it is a serious and important threat. I would note, I actually didn't know this when I introduced the amendment, but I was just handed a note from my staff that said, and Senator Booker will be interested in this, I was told that Senator Paul objected to this bill in the last Congress because it didn't include members of Congress. So I didn't know that, but that's what the note my chief counsel just passed me. Obviously, Senator Paul has been on the receiving end of 2 of these incidences of violence, and so I know it is an issue he understandably feels very personally impacted by. And so it may be that this amendment is what's necessary for it to move forward, but at least right now the votes are not here in the committee, so I will withdraw the request for a vote on it.
The amendment is withdrawn. Are there any other amendments to the substitute? If not, the question is on...
Mr. Chairman,
Senator
I'd
Cotton?
just like to speak briefly before we vote on passage here. I'm going to support this bill. I think it's important that it moves forward. I want to acknowledge Judge Salas and her husband, Mark, and express my deepest sympathy and condolences on behalf of all members of this committee and all Arkansans. No one should ever have to go through what you went through. We've heard a lot about concerns about this bill passing. If we add anything to it, I have the opposite concern about the bill passing. As Senator Cruz just reminded us, the reason this bill didn't pass last year is because Senator Paul, who has faced 2 separate attacks, once on that baseball field across the river in 2017, once on his own home, did want to expand its coverage. I understand that some of you may be concerned about my amendment that says all government officials, state and local, which I think Senator Booker says encompasses more than 20 million persons. Some of you may have the opposite concern about Senator Cruz's amendment that just included members of Congress. Perhaps as we move forward, we can find a middle ground that focuses on federal officers, be they judges or elected officials or executive branch officials. We do have a particular responsibility to all federal officers. There are lots of laws that protect federal officers or federal installations. Some states, like California, have already done this for their state and local officials. Some states, like New Jersey, has passed Daniel's Law to do it there. I think Senator Booker attended that bill signing, in fact. So maybe as we move forward and focus on getting this bill in the shape where it could actually pass across the Senate without objections from any other senators, that might be a common middle ground, but we'll work together going forward. I will be supporting it today with the hope that we can modify it and pass it into law in a future date.
Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with Senator Cotton on that.
Senator Ossoff?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. First, let me extend my deepest condolences to Judge Salas, to your husband, to your whole family for your loss, and my gratitude to Senator Booker, Senator Menendez, the bipartisan co-sponsors, for working on this legislation whose spirit and intent I fully support. I'll be voting present on this roll call vote as I continue to discuss with Senator Booker some questions I have regarding the restrictions on publication to ensure that they are the least restrictive means of achieving the noble ends of this bill. In no way does that vote suggest that I don't take utterly seriously the ongoing threat to judicial safety and the threats of safety to other officials. I want to register that for the record and again express my deepest empathy, concern, and condolences to the family. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, Senator Grassley will be added as a co-sponsor. Senator Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year, I had worked with the Administrative Office of the Courts and the bill sponsors, raising concerns with Section 5C, which I believe is now Section 4C under the new Manager's Amendment. We've got concerns with this. It creates a new federal grant program for state and local law enforcement. This is a situation where when we look at the authorities, we need to avoid excessive federal intrusion into state and local law enforcement. And, less than a year ago, I had an agreement with the sponsors and the Administrative Office of the Courts to strike this provision. I'm not sure what happened or where the oversight occurred. I'd like to vote for this bill today and get it passed out, but if the bill sponsor, Senator Booker, is willing to work with me as this bill moves to the floor on this, I'd be happy to let my amendment go today and vote for it.
Anyone else seek recognition? Senator Booker?
I just want to say Senator Lee's staff has been really great in conversation with mine over this matter and others. They've been great contributors to the bill overall, and of course, I will always lean in to work with you, Mike, on this matter and others.
Great, thank you.
Senator Cruz?
Mr. Chairman, very briefly, I would ask consent that I be added as a co-sponsor of the
Without
bill as
objection.
well, and I would also ask that I be recorded as voting no on Selinger and Harris, both of which were considered earlier in this markup.
Without objection. If there's no further effort to seek recognition or add an amendment, we will vote on final passage of S-2340 as amended. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Leahy?
Aye.
Mrs. Feinstein? Aye. Mr. Whitehouse? Aye. Ms. Klobuchar?
Aye.
Mr. Coons? Aye. Mr. Blumenthal? Aye. Ms. Hirono? Mr. Booker? Aye. Mr. Padilla? Aye. Mr. Ossoff? Mr. Grassley?
Aye.
Mr. Graham?
Aye.
Mr. Corning?
Aye.
Mr. Lee?
Aye.
Mr. Cruz?
Aye.
Mr. Sass?
Oh, I'm sorry, aye by proxy.
Mr. Hawley? Aye. Mr. Cotton?
Aye.
Mr. Kennedy?
Aye.
Mr. Tillis?
Aye by